I'm Mike Govoni, and for the last 15 years, I've been in recovery from addiction and on the deepest quest to find healing, to experience my own unique wholeness beyond the story of what happened to me. By taking an integrative, holistic approach to experience transformation, I bring you the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast, a show dedicated to people in recovery who are looking for deeper healing and transformation. Well, welcome to another episode of the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast. I'm your host, Mike Govoni, and today we will be covering a very important topic, and that is the topic of gut health. Hippocrates said over 2,000 years ago, all disease begins in the gut. So taking that statement into account, we are not just talking about digestion here. We are really talking about an organ system and an ecology so important it's now being called the second brain. The gut microbiome is probably the hottest topic in medicine as scientists are discovering that we are made of more bacteria than human cells. The topic of gut health hits home for me and is a passion for me to speak on because of my own journey healing from irritable bowel disease, ulcerative colitis. And if you don't know what ulcerative colitis is, UC is a nasty autoimmune disease that attacks the lining of your colon, causing ulcers and bleeding, which is not a good time. At the height of when I had active disease, I was having over 15 to 20 bowel movements a day with blood, which is not a good thing. And obviously, if I didn't preface that we'll be talking about some things today that may make your stomach queasy, don't worry about it. Just hang tight. It's all important information that we all need to know. So with that being said, I went on a journey of healing from ulcerative colitis, which I'll share with you a little bit about today. And we'll also be sharing about other conditions that are linked to the gut, like brain fog, cognitive issues, depression, anxiety, IBD, right? Bloating, or maybe you're not suffering from those, but maybe you're looking to just improve digestion. So we'll be covering everything gut health, and also on this episode with today's guest, Kristina Mitts, who is a clinical nutritionist. Her and I will be talking about the controversial procedure that I personally did to heal from UC, which is called a fecal transplant. Yep, you guessed that right. It's a procedure where you take the healthy fecal matter from a tested donor with a healthy microbiome, and you inoculate your own colon with it. In my case, it was through an enema, or you can also take even dried capsules. What it's doing here is it's repopulating your colon ecosystem, and in my case, it was to correct what's called dysbiosis. Dysbiosis, more or less, means there's a higher ratio of bad bugs to good bugs in your colon. So correcting it with putting or inoculating it with healthy species of microbiome is what led to my healing. That was just one kind of avenue I did, but we'll be talking about FMT. And FMT isn't a new procedure. It's actually been used in the Chinese culture since the 4th century, and they called it yellow soup. So it's been around for a long time. We'll be talking about it, and other topics we'll be covering on today's show, not just FMT. We'll be talking about how the gut microbiome is affected by stress and trauma, including PTSD, right? What is leaky gut, right? I'm sure many of you have heard of leaky gut, when the tight junctions of your mucosa lining open up and food starts to move through that into the bloodstream, and you can contact autoimmunity, or you can develop autoimmunity rather, and we'll be talking about how to address leaky gut and how to heal from it. We'll be talking about why mental health begins in your gut and steps you can take to improve your gut health that will directly affect and improve your mental health. Also, how the brain and gut are intricately connected through the superhighway called the vagus nerve, and the amazing discussion about FMT, fecal matter transplant, and a whole host of conditions that can improve from the treatment, including autism, neurological conditions, and of course, healing your gut. Also, be sure to listen all the way through the end, as I'll be offering each listener a discount off of Kristina's gut healing coaching program. So once again, be sure to stay tuned for that. I'm super excited for this conversation. So welcome, Kristina, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited as well.
For sure. This topic of gut health and microbiome is really near and dear to my heart. I've been on my own healing journey from irritable bowel disease, and it's really important that this work is shared with the world. So thank you for talking about subjects like poop and fecal, transplants and stuff like that. So, really, really hats off. Thank you for doing and bringing your medicine to the world.
Well, thank you for facilitating the communication of that.
Absolutely. And I think I just want to get in by sharing how I found you, which was kind of unique for me. And most of the listeners, I share my story of healing, healing from childhood trauma, healing from addiction, healing from irritable bowel disease. And I just was a couple weeks ago on the beach of Tulum, and I was reading a Napoleon Hill book, Think and Grow Rich, when a gentleman came up to me on the beach and was like, "Oh, this is an amazing book, man." He started talking to me about it. And then we got into the world of like transformation, personal development. And I began to share my story with him. And he's like, hold on. And he brought his buddies over. And I shared with him that I did a fecal microbial transplant, in which he said his buddy had did it too. And he brought his buddy over, and Gary was the first person that I met that actually did a FMT as well. And we shared our beautiful journeys together of how he healed from his, digestive disorder and my digestive disorder. And then your name was brought up as a person who's facilitating and doing this work. So this is how we met each other. Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's always, when I share my story about healing from IBD, but doing a fecal microbial transplant, they're always like, "What's that?" Some people are like, "What's that?" And then some people get so excited that like they found a person that did it. Like they've been reading Dr. Perlmutter's work or Dr. Hyman's work, and that they have a real living, breathing human being that actually did this. So let's dive right in. And for people that don't know what the microbiome, let's just give you a little synopsis. And I know we're still trying to figure out it all. It's a really complex ecosystem, but for those who don't know, just what is the microbiome?
The microbiome is your own personal ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses, and archaea that you carry along with you in your gut and actually throughout your whole body.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. Not a lot of people know that we have, I think, more microbes than we do human cells in our bodies. So the jury's out, but it's said that we are more bacteria than we are actually maybe human cells, which is really exciting, and also different to think about, how much of this microbiome plays an impact of our health and well-being. And this is like the hottest field in health right now. I think I was just reading Dr. Hyman's book, The Pegan Diet, and he was talking about that. This is the cutting edge stuff. So I'm just curious, what got you into the work you do in the company you started, Mind, Mood, and Microbes?
I, of course, got into this because of my own health issues, which when the bulk of them started, I made the assumption that it was all gut related. But thinking back now, I actually think my health issues started earlier. But in 2013, I was living in Guatemala, and I got an intestinal infection and took ciprofloxacin for it. And my symptoms didn't really go away. They actually started to get worse, and I started to develop all of these food sensitivities. And I managed to kind of like tough it out for a couple of years, and then moved back to Canada in 2015. And everything went downhill once I moved back to Canada, I think because of the lack of vitamin D and just how structured everything is here. Such a different way of living here than in Central America. And so I had 2 hours of energy a day. I had to move back in with my parents. Things were not looking good. And my family doctor and the other doctors I was seeing, they were like, "There's nothing wrong with you." And they also didn't want to run any further testing on me because they were worried about being audited. And so I was like, okay, I'm looking in the wrong place. And so right off the bat, I had already been researching, and I had heard about functional medicine. And so I went to see this functional medicine, or I went to this clinic actually, and there was a group of practitioners, and it was 2 hours away from me. And I was like, it's worth it. So I went, and they got me my autoimmune diagnosis, which is Hashimoto's. And that was the first time I saw microbiome testing. And so I saw that I had multiple imbalances in my microbiome. And so that was kind of like the initial shove. And I felt a little bit better working with them, but not entirely. And actually, over the next couple of years, I would just continue to sort of decline. And I saw tons and tons of naturopaths and doctors and everyone you can think of. And finally, I was like, okay, I'm not getting anywhere. I need to kind of learn how to be my own doctor. And so I did not have a ton of energy at that point. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to go back to school to be a doctor. I'm going to just start with what I can handle energy wise. So I decided to go back to uni and do nutrition diploma. And while doing that, I met my current colleague, Dr. Code. And he has training from Dr. Whale in integrative medicine and also the functional medicine. And he asked me if I wanted to help him start a clinic where the primary service would be fecal transplant. And I had also been researching that and was really into it. So I said yes, and we started that clinic. And I've done lots of FMT on myself now. I wouldn't say that's the only thing that helped me get well, but definitely being mentored by Dr. Code in functional medicine and doing more training in that, learning to look for the root cause of health issues and work on all of the imbalances because everything is connected. That's what got me well.
Amazing. And I too, we have so many similarities in our story. I was in remission from irritable bowel disease when I traveled 9 countries and landed in Guatemala, was my 3rd country in my journey. And I got a parasite and I got the amoebas, and it tripped my UC off again, the ulcerative colitis. And, I went back to the States just like you. And so we have so many similarities that I can personally relate to that in your experience. And it wasn't until I found functional medicine too that began to look at us as an integrated system. And it took a long time for that to happen, for me to get to the point where I started to really look at alternative things, including when I looked at one of the best GI doctors in the country from Brigham and Women's. He was my doctor. And I said, what's the prognosis on this? Like with this UC and IBD? And he's like fecal matter transplant. And at that point, literally, I thought they cut you open and like literally put a piece of poop in you. Like that's where I was. And I wasn't ready to even like entertain that. So I just kind of bypassed that and just kept on taking all the steroids and medications. And lo and behold, it took about 5 years later for me to start researching FMT and really I had to experience a lot more suffering before I really took things seriously. So I'm glad you started that journey right off the bat with finding these integrative practitioners, because it is important. The body is a system. It's functioning, with many parts as this in the whole. So that's beautiful. Mm-hmm. And many of my listeners have been in recovery from substance abuse. And one of my big teachings or messages is that addiction is a result of trauma. And trauma, we know, creates a dysbiosis in some cases in the microbiome and affects the microbiome. So what's some of the things you've experienced, or what do you know in relationship to how PTSD and stress have an impact on the microbiome?
Yeah, so I mean, every condition has its own microbial signature, and we found that with PTSD as well. So, for example, in research on veterans with PTSD, they tend to have more E. coli in their gut. And then with other types of PTSD, there's sort of like a different profile that's happening. So definitely with PTSD, there is some imbalance there. And I would say it's definitely impacting the neurotransmitters, so the mental health piece as well. And I have come across research where they demonstrated that the vagus nerve is being impacted as well. And so the vagus nerve is kind of like the superhighway between the gut and the brain. And there are different metabolites that are kind of used as currency for the microbes to communicate back and forth with back and forth with the brain. And some of those metabolites are neurotransmitters, some of them are toxins, and some of them are short chain fatty acids, which are, the short chain fatty acids are items that they produce from fermenting fiber.
Yeah, I'm so happy you brought up the vagus nerve. I teach a lot about the vagus nerve. In fact, I have a video coming out soon sharing a little bit about it, but the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve that goes directly into the limbic brain, down into every organ system. And the vagus nerve is impacted from trauma, and healing, or part of our healing journey, is to, let's just say, get the currency flowing back in that vagus nerve. A lot of people who suffer trauma have low vagal tone. So that connection from mind, body, the bilateral connection, brain gut axis, isn't really functioning, or isn't optimally functioning. So rehabilitating that vagus nerve is so important. And in fact, I believe we're receiving signals. For example, Datis Karazian's work, he says when the gut's on fire, the brain is on fire, like with inflammation. So it's very important when it comes to mental health, right, that we support our gut. So let's talk about that connection a little bit with brain gut axis, and why mental health, I believe, starts in the gut. Maybe you can share your input on that. And how can we begin to treat anxiety, depression, and some mental disorders by healing the gut?
Well, the compounds that most directly influence our mood, so the level to which we actually feel joyful or peaceful, those compounds are called neurotransmitters, and they are produced in the gut. So serotonin, for example, which is like our happiness neurotransmitter, 90% of our serotonin is produced in the gut and then sent elsewhere. Dopamine, which is also relevant for addiction, 50% of our dopamine is produced in the gut. And then we also have GABA, which makes us feel calm and peaceful. I don't know the quantity of which that's produced in the gut, but some of it is produced in the gut. And then I work with clients who have all sorts of sort of like overlapping mental health symptoms. So I was just talking to someone today about akathisia, if you know what that is.
I don't.
It's a feeling of discomfort in the body where it's so uncomfortable that you feel sort of just like constantly restless and like you just want to crawl out of your skin. That's the definition. And so what I'm seeing with that is that there's a big overlap there with histamine. And so histamine is also, it can be produced in the gut. I find that if people have histamine issues, there's usually a couple things going on where they also have trouble breaking it down. And so maybe they are deficient in the enzymes that break down histamine, and those can be produced in the gut. They can also be produced elsewhere too. But yeah, the histamine neurotransmitter is also, I find, relevant for just how comfortable you feel.
Yeah. So 50% of the dopamine is being made in the gut. 90% of the serotonin, the happy feel good neurotransmitter, is being made in the gut. So this is, a huge indication that how important it is for us to take care of our microbiome in our guts and heal our guts if there's a gut issue, so we can actually feel good and happy and healthy mentally. I know when I was going through my journey, I was suffering from intense anxiety. I was, constantly going through fluctuations of depression. And it wasn't until I began to really heal my gut did things kind of level off. I was on Zoloft. I was on an antidepressant for so long. And little did I know that I was suffering, even before the IBD showed itself, that I was suffering from symptoms of leaky gut, of early onset disease. And so there's a huge correlation. So that's why I think it's so very important for this message to get out, is we have to begin to work on our guts if we want to feel better mentally. Now, you mentioned GABA. Now, when I went to my functional medicine doc, they did all sorts of testing, and they realized I had some sort of inability with the glutamate system to actually make GABA. So GABA, for the people listening, is your body's most abundant neurotransmitter to help your nervous system relax. So people with addiction, stress disorders, things of that nature, feeling restless and anxious is like par for the course. And many people don't know that GABA or a GABA, deficiency may be at the root. Are you able to supplement with GABA, or how are you able to address this GABA issue?
Well, you want to increase the microbes that produce it. So I usually end up getting clients on prebiotics, which are indigestible fibers that feed those specific microbes. I would say also the cofactors are important. So a lot of time people can end up with, that imbalance between GABA and glutamate. And it can even work out so that the GABA just transforms right back into glutamate if the right cofactors aren't present. And so that comes down to diet and sometimes temporary supplementation. So B6 is really important for the GABA glutamate balance. And you do produce some B6 in your gut. And so depending on what sort of testing you're using for the microbiome, you can sometimes check like, okay, I'm over or under producing, or my microbes are over or under producing B6. And as you're working on the gut, you can potentially temporarily replace that B6 production with a probiotic if it's the right strain. And we know that that strain does produce the enzymes that produce B6. But ultimately, you want to grow your own endogenous microbes that produce the B6 and produce the GABA.
Wow. So from what I'm hearing from you right now is we're beginning to move into actually promoting the healthy particular microbiomes that are connected with any organ system or, let's say symptom, and being in working on supporting those to affect the brain or whatever it may be that we're working on. That's like amazing information.
Yeah, I mean, the potential is there. It's really hard to sort of like test directly what's happening, but we know like, okay, like these microbes have the potential to produce these enzymes, which they use to convert things into B6, for example. We can't see if that's what they're actually doing because microbes aren't always like, they're just like humans. It's like we go to work, but maybe we're not actually working. The microbes are the same. So that we can see that they have like the potential to do those things, but it doesn't mean that they're always doing it. So it's a bit of a guessing game still, but at least we can know that much.
And GABA is really important, especially if you are feeling a constant state of anxiousness or uneasiness, right? I didn't even know the symptoms I was experiencing, such as I would be laying on the couch, but I would almost feel like my body was stiff, or I would be holding my cell phone really tight where I could feel this tension. I was like, what is going on here? So I started to take some notes. Also feelings of constant dread, things of that nature. And I started running these symptoms by my functional medicine doc. And she looked at my test and she's like, yeah, you're not making enough GABA. So she began to use this particular supplement from Apex Energetics called gabatone. Now, I don't know what your research has shown. I follow a lot of work from the functional neurologist Datis Karazian. He says, yes, you can take a GABA supplement, but molecularly, GABA is too big to cross the blood-brain barrier. So you actually shouldn't feel GABA unless you have a compromised blood-brain barrier. That's a blood-brain barrier is just another barrier system kind of keeping things that shouldn't be in the brain outside of the brain. Your colon is another barrier system. Your skin is a barrier system. Your lung has a barrier system. So going back, they started supporting me with supplements like passion flower, valerian root, theanine, B6, right? And there was a synergistic compound, and I began to supplement, and little by slow, I began to feel more relaxed and more relaxed and more relaxed. But thank God there's these other practitioners that, have this integrative, lens to see through, or else I would probably still be suffering from that intense anxiousness. So I'm really happy that this is getting out there, and this information, especially as it pertains to relaxing and supporting the nervous system.
For sure. Yeah, I never give people just straight GABA, especially since, I personally have had weird experiences with GABA as well, where like glutamine is supposed to be one of the things that is like a precursor for GABA. And I tried supplementing with glutamine and it made me feel crazy because I didn't have enough of the cofactors. So I always start out by working on the cofactors and trying to balance the microbiome a little bit. And then potentially using like a compound with passion flower and B6 and things like that.
So there's a interesting topic out there in regards to the work around or the research around leaky gut. Now, I've come across some practitioners that think leaky gut is like doesn't exist. And then again, there's practitioners, you know, world-renowned doctors like Stephen Gundry, who was a world-renowned heart surgeon, that all his work now is basically about supporting people with leaky gut and lectins and things of that nature. So maybe you can share a little bit about what leaky gut is and what are some of the causes and how do we heal it?
Leaky gut is definitely real. So all we have to do is look at the research on tight junctions and zonulin, then it's pretty evident. So we know that the gluten protein definitely interferes with those tight junctions and can trigger them to open and remain open for too long, which then allows things from the gut to make it into systemic circulation. There are other things that impact the tight junctions as well. So like stress, for example, or dysbiosis or imbalance of the microbes or toxins being produced by the microbes. So yeah, definitely leaky gut is real. And we can explain it by just saying, okay, those tight junctions are now looser than they're supposed to be, or opening or remaining open longer than they should, and then allowing materials from the gut to make it into systemic circulation, which then triggers the immune system and systemic inflammation.
So when you say tight junctions, are we referring to like tight junctions in the mucosa lining in the colon?
Yeah, on the epithelial lining of the intestines. So everything is supposed to be like tight and snug, and there's that selective permeability. So we want to allow nutrients into systemic circulation so that we can use them. But then we don't want to allow like full proteins from our food or toxins or anything like that.
Yeah, so you mentioned gluten. I'm desperately trying to get my fiance to go on a gluten-free diet. Not so much by my recommendation, but the recommendation of her naturopathic doctor too. And I'm like, come on, let's do it. Gluten is so inflammatory, as you just mentioned. It increases the risk of opening up those tight junctions. And once those tight junctions begin to open, you know, as Kristina was saying, the substance or matter leaks through those tight junctions and ends up directly in your bloodstream and can cause all sorts of other problems, including autoimmunity. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, leaky gut is a precursor to autoimmunity.
So is it safe to say if you have an autoimmune condition, then you may have leaky gut?
Yeah, I kind of just make that assumption with anyone who comes to us who has autoimmunity. We always are going to work on the leaky gut, even if they don't have digestive symptoms. I mean, you can still have imbalance within your microbiome and with the leaky gut, even if you don't have digestive symptoms.
And what's the testing like for leaky gut? How do they?
I don't even bother testing for leaky gut because it's so all over the place. I mean, zonulin for a while was kind of like the gold standard, but then it's like, okay, well, zonulin can be super high or it can be super low and both indicate leaky gut. I'd rather just make the assumption and work on leaky gut anyways.
So basically just assume that the person has a leaky gut. I mean, what's so interesting in, you know, the work of Dr. Hyman, you know, always talking about supporting and healing the earth's soil from, you know, glyphosate and other toxins that we've been putting on the soil for so long. And we've been killing the microbiome, the microbiome of the soil, basically, and how that's affecting our gut, and how we need to begin to take those foods that are pro-inflammatory out of our diet so they don't disrupt and kill the microbes, you know, in our ecosystem, in our bellies. What have you seen in regards to supporting people and what type of diets to heal their overall microbiome and not participate in killing them off with foods that have glyphosate on them?
Yeah, well, going chemical free, not just for glyphosate, but for as many of the chemicals as possible is really important. If you have low dose exposure to glyphosate over a period of time, it's kind of like you're just taking low dose antibiotics. So you are killing your microbes if you are exposed to glyphosate or taking it in through food or water. And glyphosate is usually, it's not just on its own, it's always in packaged up so nicely with all of these other items and chemicals and heavy metals as well. So you're not just taking in the glyphosate. Glyphosate is actually usually passed through the body pretty quickly. It's water soluble, but the things that come along with it, like the heavy metals and some of these other chemicals, are harder to get rid of. So yeah, going chemical free is really important. In terms of like types or styles of diets, I do like Dr. Hyman's vegan diet. I think that's a good style of diet to work towards. But with most of the clients that I work with, they have so many food sensitivities or discomfort from eating food that it's like we have to start out, like we'll start out with where I'll meet people where they're at, and then we'll work towards something like that.
So if someone comes to you and they have a lot of food sensitivities, do you start them off on an elimination diet, or where do you start with them?
A lot of time people actually know what their food sensitivities are by the time they come to me. They've been at this for a while, but sometimes I will use an elimination diet. I work with a lot of SIBO as well. So depending on the type of SIBO, we might do either a low FODMAP diet, or if it's hydrogen sulfide, we'll do a low sulfur diet. And then we can tell by looking at the microbiome testing, we can make more specific recommendations as to what the person needs. And so I like to use that as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I want to get into the topic of fecal matter transplant, or fecal microbial transplant. It's a topic that is very interesting to me, and one that I am looking forward to having with you. And if it wasn't for an FMT, I don't know if I would be where I am today. I suffered from irritable bowel disease, where I had 15 or 20 bowel movements a day with blood in them. At the end of my rope here, I was on an immunologic drug to calm my calm my immune system down so it wouldn't attack my colon. And yet no one was really addressing any of the microbes, any of the dysbiosis. And once again, it took me to seek and seek and seek, like you, to find out what was going on. At the end of my own personal journey, I was looking at two doctors. One was a hepatologist for the liver, because the immunologic drug was giving me autoimmune hepatitis. And at that point, they said, you have to get off this drug. They gave me a liver biopsy and realized I was getting autoimmune hepatitis. And I couldn't continue with the drug anymore for my colon. So I looked these doctors in the face and I said, okay, there wasn't much left for me here. And that's when I began researching the topic of FMT. I came across the wonderful website of thepowerofpoop.com. I'm not sure if you've seen it, but it's an amazing website. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, people were telling my story on there, suffering IBS, IBD, the drugs they were on and that sort of thing. And I knew in my heart that I was going to do this. And I was working with a functional medicine practitioner at that time, Dr. Carey. And I said, what do you think about this? She didn't know really, she knew about it, but she didn't know exactly. And I knew. So I said, all right, I'm doing this. Will you support me? And she's like, yeah, I will. So basically we started doing some Genova tests, and that, stool testings of that nature. And I had to begin looking for a poop donor. So I found a good friend of mine who, was vaginally birthed. He was breastfed. That's important too. We'll get to that in a little bit. And I asked him if he would donate. So he donated his stool, and I did some implants from his stool, about 10 days in a row of implants. Once again, for the record, you do not just take someone's random poop and give yourself an FMT. It was under the supervision of a doctor. I had him tested, all blood work, his microbiome. And one interesting point was, she looked at his microbe test and said, she asked me to ask him if he had a toothache. So just by an inflammation level by a certain microbe, she correlated it to a tooth problem. So I asked him, and he's like, "Yeah, I do." So that's why there's a little bit of inflammation. But lo and behold, who would have ever picked up on that? I guarantee just any regular primary care doctor, first of all, would probably not be talking to you about a fecal matter transplant, nor would they actually have the wherewithal to see this correlation. So I felt I was in the right place. I did it, and it began to turn my digestion on like this. I did find a doctor about a year later who would actually give me a FMT at his clinic, which they went up there with a what's it called? Colonoscope. Colonoscope, and repopulated the whole thing with healthy, microbes. So this, and from there, my digestion has been smooth sailing. I don't suffer from IBD today. I don't have blood in my stool. I know when there's a little bit of inflammation, and I can make adjustments as they go. But this has been a complete game changer for me. So I am so grateful for it. I'm grateful that you're in the arena of it and supporting people to learn about it, how to do it, things of that nature. So let's get into fecal microbial transplant and how we can use it to heal from, they're using it for autism. In right here, the Pegan diet, Dr. Hyman, one quick stat, he says a fecal transplant has been shown to reduce autistic symptoms by 50%. So tell me about FMT from your perspective, and what are you doing with it to support people in their health and healing?
So I love FMT, but part of me also thinks that some people kind of see it, or they put it on a pedestal, and it's kind of like a cheat for some people.
That it's like a panacea?
Yeah. So, it works really well for some conditions. It works well for autism, for ulcerative colitis, for Crohn's. It works well for C. difficile, of course. Most of the research is on FMT for C. difficile, and it's like 99% effective for curing C. difficile, which is amazing.
Hold on, did you say 99%?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you hear that, guys? 99% cure rate. But they'll only do it for one condition right now in the United States. I don't know if it's the same way for Canada, and that's for C. diff. But all these other people with ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease are suffering.
Yep. Yeah, so it's the same in Canada. If you want to use FMT as a medical treatment and get it done, have it done by a doctor or in a hospital, you'll only get it done for C. difficile. But there are clinical trials, so you can check out what clinical trials are happening in your country, and there are trials on using FMT for everything from multiple sclerosis to bipolar disorder. So there's definitely lots going on research-wise, and they're still figuring out what is the best method of administration? What is the best way to prep the person? And there really is a lot of disagreement in the FMT world. And I think we're still experimenting a lot. So if you're using it for anything besides C. difficile, you are you have to understand that it is a bit of an experiment, and you're experimenting on yourself. And the practitioners are too, because there just isn't enough research yet. So like I said, it works well for some conditions. For everything else, it's kind of hit or miss, but I still have I have really great testimonials where people are like, this changed my life, for things like depression and anxiety and Lyme disease and multiple sclerosis and chronic constipation and post-cancer chemo, all sorts of things. And so it does work in some people for other conditions, but then I also have feedback from people and testimonials where it was like, okay, this was maybe a small piece of my health puzzle, or no, it didn't work at all. So that, just due to that would be another reason to just understand that, you're experimenting on yourself, and just like everything else that you try, it may or may not work.
Yeah, it's definitely not a panacea. I've heard too, some people have taken to it, like myself, amazingly, and it's helped heal from conditions like IBD, and then other people that it hasn't done so much. So I think that's interesting. if I had to share just my hypothesis with you on that, a little piece of the pie, I think, or rather a big piece of the pie with IBD, if you look at some of the research, even childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences, people grow up in families that are challenging with a lot of stress, with a lot of trauma, and their nervous systems are stuck on and they're shooting out, pro-inflammatory cytokines. I mean, unless you directly work on that nervous system dysregulation, it doesn't matter if you're putting, healthy microbes up there. If your nervous system is dysregulated and you're constantly in a fight or flight, state, you can't heal. You have to be in that parasympathetic. Things have to be settled. So for me, a huge part of my own healing journey was healing, my nervous system. That was through neurofeedback. That was through meditation. That was through breath work. And that has been a huge part. And I don't know if you know this stat from Dr. Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory, but we're receiving 80% of our information from our gut to our brain, 20% from our brain to our bodies, which is like amazing. So if you want to talk about, mental health, it has to be affect health, has to be body health. So once again, trauma is stored in the viscera, in the tissues, right? Even the dorsal vagal shutdown response through the vagus nerve is subdiaphragmatic. That's the lower intestine, digestion, things of that nature. And if you've been affected, from trauma, then you've been shut down for a long time, then that's a huge thing to address in order to get yourself back online and feeling safe and feeling comfortable in your own skin. So there's so many different layers to this that we need to address, that so much, you're in it yourself as an integrative practitioner. But yes, FMT is not a panacea. I speak highly of it, and I would, if you're suffering, I would try it under the right circumstances. And can people only get it for C. diff?
Well, like I mentioned, if you want to get it done by like a gastroenterologist or in a clinic or in a hospital in North America, you can only get it done for C. diff, unless you're partaking in a clinical trial. But you can visit other countries and have it done, say in Australia for IBD, or you can go through Taymount in the UK, which is where I trained. Or, you can still go through myself, and we essentially just offer FMT as a therapy. So we don't say it's a treatment, and we actually don't even call it FMT. So if you add a T on the end for transplant, that makes it a medical device. And so we just call it FM or MTT or GFT. There's all sorts of names for it now. But yeah, fecal microbiota solution. That's kind of what we work with. And yeah, we will guide you through the process of using it yourself.
Yeah, beautiful. That's an interesting, world of the whole medical establishment and working around. And I'm a big fan of like, hey, I think part of why this isn't out there is because the biologics and immunologic drugs are huge money makers. And, how much is poop, right? So, we have to think about that, and it, for some cases like my own, it worked. So I am happy I got outside of the mainstream model there and took health into my own hands so I could actually heal. Because if it was left, to where I was, I don't even know if I would maybe be here today. They told me in about 8 years, I would need a liver transplant if I didn't take care of this. So I know what it's like to be in that place of having, a serious situation and following your heart and listening and picking up the cues and following the breadcrumbs for your healing is so important, but you got to really pay attention. And, yes, it's also important to do things correct. We're not saying just go out there and, like I say, give yourself an FMT or FM from someone else, talk to someone that knows what this is about, do your research. And moving along a little bit here, what are maybe the top 3 to 5 diet and or lifestyle tips you would give for improving your health?
So, I mean, number one, probiotic supplements are overrated. You want to grow your own microbes. And to do that, you need to be eating fiber rich foods or taking prebiotic supplements. I find for those of us who are really deficient in the right microbes, we need a bit of a push from prebiotic supplements, which are stronger than just getting it from food. Number two would be to eat a diverse diet for similar reasons so that you're feeding all of the different microbes and not just like a certain subset of microbes. So eating from the rainbow, like did I eat blue this week? Purple, black, red, orange, yellow, all of the different colors, because all of those colorful polyphenols feed different microbes. And number three, I would say diet, lifestyle. I'm trying to think. I think maybe clean water, clean food, making sure there's no chemicals in your water or food. Because like I mentioned, that if you are taking in chemicals or glyphosate, then it is like taking an antibiotic.
Yeah, for sure. You have to get away from the processed junk and start eating clean. First step I did was I started growing my own food. So I started, planting herbs and peppers and all these different vegetables that were easy to grow, and then I went all organic and I started to eat bone broth. What's your take on bone broth?
Well, I think it depends on the person. So like I mentioned, I work with a lot of people with a lot of sensitivities, and not everyone's going to tolerate bone broth. The collagen and yeah, it can be higher in FODMAPs. So if someone is really sensitive to FODMAPs, they might not do well with bone broth. Also, it can be high in histamine. And so I do work with a lot of clients with histamine intolerance. So it can be an issue there. You have to make sure you're getting your bones from a good quality source, because with the heavy metals, bodies like to store away things like lead in bones. So making sure you're getting it from good organic grass-fed sources. I like to mix it up. I don't personally just do bone broth for myself. I like to do meat stock, where you use like the actual meat and the bones, and veggies. And so you get more of like a wider array of nutrients and amino acids.
Mm-hmm. So you talked about prebiotics to actually support and grow your own bacteria. Mm-hmm. Can you tell the audience a little bit what is a prebiotic and what foods are high in prebiotics and or supplements or powders?
Yeah, so prebiotics are types of indigestible fiber. So we don't absorb them through the gut lining. They stay semi-intact, and then the microbes feed on them, ferment them, and turn them into short chain fatty acids, or turn them into any of the currencies that benefit us. And so prebiotic fibers can be they're polyphenols, so the colorful things actually do count as prebiotics. So that's why I mentioned eat the rainbow. But more directly, things like Jerusalem artichoke, squash, tubers. If you cook and cool your grains, that turns into resistant starch, which is fiber for the microbes. And berries, basically any type of vegetable or fruit, you're going to get fiber with it.
Yeah. And one thing that's coming to mind right now is there's a huge, uptake in people eating a carnivore diet, just like plain meat. What's your take on that?
I don't think it's sustainable for the long term. I think I can understand why people would use it sort of to deal with symptoms acutely, but I don't think that it's a long-term solution. I don't think that you're getting to the root of the problem, which usually does involve microbial balance. And if you do stay on the carnivore diet for a long time, you are going to end up changing your microbial landscape, and you're going to end up with more of the microbes that are bile tolerant, because every time you eat meat and fat, it stimulates bile release. And so bile is antimicrobial against a lot of microbes, but then there are some that tolerate it. So the ones that tolerate it are going to be the ones that stick around if that's what you're eating a lot of. And you're going to end up with more microbes that like to putrefy protein. And so maybe it's helping you deal with symptoms in the short term, but then you could end up in the long run kind of digging yourself into a hole where now you have protein putrefaction and ammonia production and more of these bile tolerant microbes, which you're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day with Dr. Hyman and Dave Asprey, and they were talking about the carnivore diet, that it's not sustainable long term. And the reason why people feel so good right in the beginning with it is because they have a lot of sensitivities to the foods with the carbohydrates, and other foods that are plant-based, and so they're taking them out and they're not having the reactions. But long term, it is changing the ecosystem of our colons and guts, and possibly not for the good. I believe having a diet, I believe everyone's different. So bioindividuality, and what may be medicine for you may be poison for me, and really beginning to slow down and paying attention of how you're feeling after you eat certain foods. Mindfulness is a key component to really getting in touch with the reactions your body is having. And many of us are just living too fast of a life, and really too occupied with really making the correlations of what's happening. So yes, I think keto and carnivore could be a start to jumpstart us in the right direction. But overall, finding a balanced diet, including one rich in plants and fiber, has been shown to support us in longevity with health. So as we wind down here with the interview, Kristina, maybe you can share with the audience any supplement recommendations that may support them with healing or improving their guts and digestion.
Yeah, so some that people will have access to. There's one called Holigos, Holigos. That one is a really great prebiotic for lactobacillus and bifidobacteria, which are pretty important members of the microbiome. I will also sometimes use galacto-oligosaccharides, which feed kind of like a similar profile of microbes. I use the brand Invivo, INVIVO, for the galacto-oligosaccharides. I usually recommend some sort of like really high ORAC, so like antioxidant containing supplements, something like black currant powder or cranberry powder.
And those are high in polyphenols, right? Cranberry powder?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, actually, Dr. Heimer was talking about how important those polyphenols are. So cranberry powder, that's interesting.
Yep. Yeah, although you want to get like the low sugar ones, and there's really only one brand out there that makes it low sugar. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but there is one out there that is lower in sugar, and you can taste it. It tastes, it's not sweet. It actually tastes like a little bit bitter, which is what you want. And then besides that, all of the other supplements that I would recommend, it's specific to, okay, well, what has turned up in this person's microbiome testing, or on a nutrient panel, or on their blood work, or whatever else it is we've run for them.
Beautiful. And do you run labs for people when they come to you?
Yeah. So I have some people who are like, I'm just here for the FMT. I feel like I understand it. Let's just like do this and stick to that. But I think in terms of maximizing your experience with FMT, or just getting yourself through the chronic illness hump and on into the other side, you really have to look at the whole body. And so I prefer to like run blood work, do urine panels, do the stool testing, and really get a good idea of what's happening for the person.
So you're doing like a whole comprehensive approach to the whole person and what's going on with your work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, beautiful. I love the name too. Mind, mood, and microbes. It's like it's like those little bugs are like having so much to do with everything: your mind, your mood, your ecosystem. It's beautiful.
Definitely.
And as we wind down here, where can people find you and learn more about you and your services?
So I share a lot on Instagram. So mind.mood.microbes is the Instagram handle. And then besides that, it's really just the website. So www.mindmoodmicrobes.ca. My colleague, Dr. Code, and I sometimes do Facebook Lives. So if you add him on Facebook, just Bill Code, when we're in the swing of things, we try to do Facebook Lives every week or every other week, but he's on holiday right now. His daughter just had a baby, so they're helping out with the new baby. And we have a book that we have written together. So if you go to his website, www.drbillcode.com, then the book Solving the Brain Puzzle, actually the new edition is coming out soon. And I just rewrote the microbiome chapter. So you can also learn more. That book is especially good for neurological disorders and multiple sclerosis because Dr. Code is an expert in he's managed to overcome multiple sclerosis himself and now is an expert in neurological conditions.
Such beautiful work, such beautiful work. I really appreciate everything you've had to go through for you to get to where you are today and bring your beautiful medicine to the world. So thank you for chatting with us today, Kristina. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Be well. Thank you for listening to today's episode, and I hope this conversation was as enlightening for you as it was for me. If you liked today's show and found the information to be valuable, please feel free to leave a comment. It's a great way to support show rating so others can find us through the maze of algorithms and learn how to heal in their life in recovery. Knowing why and how to take care of your gut is so important, and it's wonderful souls like Kristina who are helping people make that possible. In fact, as a gift to all you beautiful listeners today, Kristina is offering $100 off of any of her gut healing programs when you mention the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast. To make it easy, you can click the link in the show notes to contact Kristina and set up your complimentary discovery call with her today. Once again, thank you for listening, and Kristina, thank you for sharing on the Healing Beyond Recovery podcast. And remember, you can heal no matter what your story may be.